I feel very called to become a member of the Catholic Church.
Love the Catholic Church. It's just the best place to be.
From the studios of EWTN, this is Open Line. In North America, call toll-free 1-800-585-9396. That's 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985. You can also send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
Well, we've reached the end of another week on Open Line. It's Open Line Friday with EWTN's Vice President of Theology, Mr. Colin Donovan. If you've got a question about theology, church teaching, canon law, any of those sorts of things, Colin is your man, and you can call him at 1-800-585-9396. That's toll-free anywhere in North America. And more importantly, if you have ever called on a previous edition of Open Line and the host has told you to call back on Friday and talk to Colin, today is your day. 1-800-585-9396. If you're outside the United States and Canada, your number is 205-271-2985, and we'll put you straight to the front of the line at 205-271-2985. Or you can send us an email, openline@ewtn.com. I'm Jack Williams. Elena Rodriguez produces the program, and your call screener is the lovely and talented Matt Gubensky. Colin, welcome back from vacation and theology roundtabling and all the things that have kept us apart for the last few weeks.
Well, that's true, and then we had a surgery trip before that, so I've missed about three or four in the last month and a half. So, yes, I am back. So you caught me off-road, so to speak, back from a wedding of my sister-in-law and her husband, a lovely couple, Katie and Robbie. So I asked people to pray for them, that they will have a good holy marriage.
Awesome. The trip was good?
It was. It was very good. The weather was outstanding on the East Coast until the rain set in here a couple days ago.
1-800-585-9396 is your phone number. Let's start with an email from Yolanda. Hi, Colin. I was recently asked to sponsor a baby girl. I hardly ever see her. I have no friendship or relationship with her parents. I've talked to them just a few times, but I do text with the mother. As I share the Word of God through these text messages, I feel like I shouldn't be this little girl's sponsor because I feel very strongly about doing God's will. The baby girl's parents are not married. I don't know exactly how involved they are in the faith or how willing they are to commit to this life of faith with God. What should I do? Plus, my husband is not involved in the church yet. He only goes to Holy Mass on Sundays. That's Yolanda.
Yeah, I think that's pretty clear-cut. You, as a Catholic, you can be the sponsors for Catholic babies because you're saying you're going to raise them in the faith. Well, what faith? You can't raise them. There's no such thing as the non-denominational faith or the non-practical. No. You can be a sponsor for Catholic babies, and other Catholics can as well, but non-Catholics cannot be the godparents/sponsors for Catholic children who are being baptized into the Catholic Church, nor should Catholics do that for those, because you can't say that you will lead this child and raise it in the Lutheran faith or the Baptist faith or something like that. If nothing else, I would think that you would have to be honest and say, I'll be the sponsor, but you got to realize I'm going to be doing a full court press to get this child into the church. And that's certainly not what any parent would want.
Thanks so much for that email, Yolanda. Is there anything else there you want to take a swing at, Colin, from an email standpoint before we...
Yeah, well, let's see here. Somebody writing from England, they want to know they've been lay reader, server, teacher, and cantor in the Anglican Church. I have to face my first confession with a Catholic priest before getting confirmed again, and it scares me to death. Do you have any advice of how best to deal with this? Well, I think a lot of people coming into the church are in that situation. If they were baptized as children in a non-Catholic church and the baptism was valid, the church accepts that baptism. But that means now you have a period of life where you're beyond the age of reason, and you need to see whether you've committed mortal sin. Catholics must confess all mortal sin and number of kind since their last good confession or since baptism, if it's their first confession. And so does somebody coming into the church. And I have one practice I recommend. Go sit down in front of the Blessed Sacrament. You can use the 10 Commandments as listed in Exodus or Deuteronomy or in a prayer book. Catholic, I would even say if you've got an Anglican prayer book and you've got the 10 Commandments listed in there, go down and ask yourself, have I sinned against these in serious ways? Those are mortal sins. Have I sinned against them in slight ways? Those are venial sins and are not the necessary object of confession. But if you have committed any serious faults against the commandments of God since your baptism, then you should confess those in number and in kind, like, I stole a large amount of money from somebody, I gave it back to them, they didn't press charges, fine, they forgave you. Now I'm asking God to forgive. So this is the kind of review. So go in before the Blessed Sacrament with the commandments, with a prayer book, with a Catholic prayer book very often, which has a examination of conscience in depth in there, and take some notes. Maybe make them a little cryptic in case somebody finds your notes and wonders what these are. You can do that and then take those with you when you go for confession. Ask the help of your guardian angel. Ask the help of Our Lady, and speak openly to the priest as if it were Jesus himself, because Jesus did say, "Whose sins you shall forgive, they are forgiven. Whose sins you shall retain, they are retained." And he said that to the church, and he acts through the church. And think of your confession in that way.
And I would offer as a suggestion for our emailer or anybody else who's in this situation, there's an examination of conscience found in a book by Dave Duran. Interestingly enough, it's a book called Time Management for Catholics. And the book is really good, but it has a chapter in the book where it has the most phenomenal examination of conscience that I have ever run across. And it examines aspects of each commandment that you wouldn't intuitively immediately realize belong to that commandment, and it's very thought-provoking and available at EWTN Religious Catalog at EWTNRC.com.
That raises a good point, and I would bet that he, in constructing that, saw what the Catechism had to say, because it does the same things, the ways in which you fulfill the commandments. Say, honor thy father and mother. How do we fulfill this commandment? What is the obligation there? Do I honor them when they tell me to do something I know to be wrong? And the answer to that is no, you don't have to do that. But, what constitutes fulfilling the commandment? What constitutes violating the commandment? And the Catechism has a lot of details. That could be another meditation point for a new convert as well.
Awesome. Off to a flying start on an open line Friday with Colin Donovan. 1-800-585-9396. That's toll-free anywhere in North America. 1-800-585-9396. If you get a busy signal, keep trying. Open line Friday with Colin Donovan.
Next time on Life on the Rock. St. Veronica Young Adults has become one of the most active adult parish groups in the Diocese of Arlington, and guest Michael Phillimore and Linda Grijalba can attest to why. They share how their group is growing in Christ's love. Next time on Life on the Rock.
Monday on EWTN Radio's Open Line Show, John Martinoni takes your questions about the Bible and the Catholic Church. 3 p.m. Eastern on EWTN.
60 Seconds with Mother Angelica.
We have to think the way God thinks. See? If I hate my brother, that's not how God thinks. If you lie or cheat, that's not how God is. If you have a hot temper, if you're proud, arrogant, if you find it hard to forgive and forget, that's not like God. What does that mean? It means you're not acting like God. It's foolish to think that you're going to die and pop, boom, right into heaven when you hate half the people there. You still hate your mother-in-law. You still hate, may she rest in peace, but you hope she doesn't. All these people you don't even like.
The people you know and trust are on EWTN.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question or comment, call 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985 or send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
We'd love to hear what you think of our programming. Give EWTN Radio's listener comment line a call, 205-795-5773. That's available to you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 205-795-5773. To the phones we go. Our leadoff hitter is Susan in Virginia. She's listening on Sirius XM Channel 130. Susan, what's your question today for Colin Donovan?
Yes, my question regards annulments and the process in the parish. Is this generally handled by the priest, or is it often handled by a lay minister?
Well, in terms of giving information out to people as to what they have to do and why, there's no reason that a person in the parish can't be established by the pastor to do that. That's quite different than being a canon lawyer working on the tribunal or assisting a couple in preparing the paperwork or whatever. For those, there are many lay people who are canon lawyers now. They can sit as judges on the tribunals or sit as acting capacities there. And so at an even lesser level, it's certainly true that a person in the parish can be designated as this focal point. I suppose historically it often would have been the parish secretary who simply made sure the people knew what they had to do, get the paperwork and get it sent on to the tribunal. Ultimately, it will be the officers of the tribunal, the judges, and then, of course, anyone who assists the lay people who will, the lawyers who might do that. They'll be the ones more intimately involved. So there's no reason that I can think of that at the parish level somebody can't be designated to, sort of be the, sort of the ombudsman or promoter of doing it in a proper way and getting your paperwork you need and documents and so on.
Is that helpful, Susan?
Yes, it is, very much. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
Oh, God bless
You're
you.
welcome.
Thanks for the phone call. That opens up a line for you at 1-800-585-9396. Next up is Natalie in Nebraska. She's listening on Spirit Catholic Radio FM 102.7. Hi, Natalie. You're on with Colin Donovan.
He's listening on Spirit Catholic Radio FM 102.7.
Natalie, if you'll turn your radio down, we will come right back to you. In the meantime, we'll go to Janice who is
Doesn't say
on
where
the
she
line.
is.
It doesn't say where she is. They threw me a curveball here, Colin. Matt Gubinski did that to me. Can you believe it? Janice, you're on with Colin Donovan. Janice, are you there? Well, we're 0 for 2. I have to protect the plate, Colin. I've got two strikes on me now.
And it's Friday the 14th. I don't understand why this is happening.
Tell you what, let's try Jim in the great state of Maryland. He's listening on Sirius XM Channel 130. Jim, are you going to bail me out?
Yeah, I'm going to bail you out.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. What's your question for Colin?
Okay, I have a friend of mine that's a deacon, and he was voicing the concern that if two of the parishioners that he has are gay, and if they would come to him and then ask to be married, what would be the legal possible ramifications? He was wondering if he would get sued.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's been approved by the Supreme Court is a civil marriage. The church is a witness of that. In this sense, it's an officer of the state, the priest or deacon, or even a lay person who the bishop would depute to do that, to receive those vows. But that's a religious function, and being officer of the state is secondary to it. So I think he's both legally any cleric is fully within his rights to say, well, we don't believe in gay marriage in the Catholic Church or in rabbi in the Orthodox Jewish faith or whatever, and no, I will not marry you. I marry two Catholics who meet the canonical requirements to get married, and you do not meet the canonical requirements to get married, and therefore I can't witness your marriage. I don't believe that automatically a lawyer could, or somebody more familiar with state laws could correct me, obviously, but I don't know why a priest, for instance, could just, I don't think they could marry anyone indiscriminately. It's within their office that they're doing it at the parish. So therefore, to be invited to marry somebody, I'm not sure that they're entitled to do that. So I think the First Amendment grounds protects the officers of the church, the clergy, and until such time as the courts start, and I believe they will at some point, start saying no. Thankfully, we can give at least one thank you to Justice Kennedy, who at least tried to indicate that the court was not likely to say that somebody could be forced to violate their religious principles to marry other people. Of course, that leaves the question of having to violate them to sell things to other people. But this is, I think we're still quite far away from the point at which the government would say, no, you must. I think our First Amendment at this time protects that.
Is that what you're looking for, Jim?
That's basically it. I was wondering, just would it be wise for us, for the religious, not to be people of the state, and just say, okay, the state does a ceremony, and then we take and do
this
it
is sure. Yeah, this is what's done in Europe. You do a civil wedding, and then you do your church wedding. If you're a Catholic or any other faith, you do that before your minister, rabbi, imam, or whoever. That could certainly be done, and there are arguments on both sides. I know the Archbishop Chaput has speculated similarly, say, well, maybe the church should not serve as officers of the state. And there's no necessity that they do, because then, there are certain advantages to having your marriage recognized by the state. But you can do that that done in other ways, simply by, getting your marriage license and so on and so forth. So I think there's a debate going on, and I think maybe the time will come when we'll say, well, we can't continue to witness on behalf of the state as well as on behalf of God and the church, but we're not there yet, and arguments are being made in favor of abandoning that role, and also in favor of being maintained it. So we'll see where the debate goes.
Let's head back to Nebraska and try Natalie again.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate the phone call. Back to Nebraska we go. We'll try Natalie again, who's listening on Spirit Catholic Radio, FM 102.7. Natalie, what's your question today for Colin?
Hi. I was wondering why John, he didn't include, in the Gospel of John, he didn't include the words of consecration in the Last Supper. And I was just kind of curious about this, because he had in John 6, he has the whole bread of life discourse, and he really emphasized the Eucharist. And I was wondering, I've heard something where he didn't include it because he had some symbols in the John chapter 6 that kind of, I don't know, made it even more
sure.
important, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's probably a lot simpler than that. The Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, were written earlier, within probably 2 decades or so of the events themselves. They are giving a historical account, and therefore it's appropriate to have given a good deal of detail on the events themselves, as they did, sometimes giving different sets of the details on the same events. John is generally taken to have written about 60 years after the Last Supper, in the 90s A.D., and to be writing a more theological text. In other words, as much of an explanation as a history. The history is already being out there, so he wasn't adding anything new to the history. But for instance, a classic example of this is the fact that he doesn't attempt to give an account of all the kinds of miracles that Jesus did, or even to say that, he did these and that, but rather he gives 7 of them, which in a Jewish way of understanding things represents sort of the fullness. So he gives 7 representative signs, especially the Eucharistic ones, the miracles, and gives basically the theology of that in doing so. So I think it was a question of not having a necessity to do that, others having done it before, and rather to have given his unique theological insights after 60 years of reflection on the great mystery of the very existence and ministry and life and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and to spend his efforts in his gospel doing that, rather than giving the details that others had given 20, 30, 40 years before.
Thanks so much, Natalie, for that phone call. That opens up a line for you at 1-800-585-9396. Next stop for us is Michigan. Robert, listening on Baraga Broadcasting, FM 90.9. Robert, what's your question today for Colin?
Yes, hi. I enjoy your program very much. Thanks for taking my call.
Mm-hmm.
It has to do with the Emperor Constantine and the Council of Nicaea. And what role, if any, did Constantine play in the establishment of the Catholic canon?
None.
None,
because the fathers were already debating this, and the fathers debated it after him. The council, as a council of bishops, was able to, I don't think they actually said very much, they didn't, on that particular issue. The first high-level listing of the canon was by Pope Sylvester in around 380 A.D., There was a synod in Rome. We don't have the text of the synod, but we have a letter from the Pope to a bishop in France with some information about the decisions made by that synod in Rome, and one of those was the canon, and he gives what the canon is. Another example that goes along with that, the earlier councils, those which were called by the Emperor Constantine to settle disputes because the empire was torn religiously between the Arians and the Catholics, was that they were mostly Eastern bishops. The Eastern Orthodox do not have the Western canon that the Latin Church does, that the Roman Church does, and with regard to the New Testament, what the Protestant churches do. The Eastern churches, some of them accept everything in the Septuagint. So instead of, for example, the 2 Maccabees that Roman Catholics accept, they will have the 4 Maccabees, and they will have other books as well that Rome said, that in the list from Rome from 380, and then by Augustus and Hippo and Carthage in the 390s, and then by the Council of Trent in the 1500s, did not list. So they ended up going their own way, and the different Orthodox churches felt free to say what they took as the holy books. The Roman Church took it not based on anything Constantine said, but 50 years later, when the fathers, among their arguments, finally a decision is met. This is a classic demonstration of how there is development of theology and insight on the part of the church. Christ gave us everything. The apostles gave us everything between Christ and the apostles at the end of the apostolic age. The church did not have a book that they looked through to see, now this means this and that means that. They studied it. They prayed. They reached consensus. The fathers passed on what they unanimously heard in their various parts of the empire from the apostles who went there. Ignatius from Peter in Antioch, and then of course Peter went on to Rome, and so on. So you look at all of these traditions where there is unanimity, and the church says we have something here. We have the unanimous opinion of those in contact with the apostles. It must be from Christ. And with the canon, they debated these things. What were the arguments in favor of Hebrews being from apostolic? What were the arguments against it? Book of Revelation. What were the arguments pro and con? So the synoptics, the Gospel of John, readily accepted. Pauline letters, readily accepted. There were debates on other things, and those debates finally reached a conclusion when authority, the church, said, this is what the canon is.
Open Line Friday with EWTN's Vice President of Theology, Colin Donovan.
Coming up later today on Cresta in the Afternoon.
Our topics during Cresta in the Afternoon toggle between church teaching and then using that teaching to shine a light on our world. We'll look at Christ in culture, church and world, religion and public life, from abortion to Zechariah and everything in between. Biblical criticism, Hollywood productions, academic debate, family and love, prayer and spirituality.
Cresta in the Afternoon, later today on EWTN Radio.
On Saturday morning, don't miss the Catholic Business Hour with your host Dick Lyles, focusing on careers and business with a Catholic perspective.
This Saturday, Dick will be interviewing Reggie Littlejohn, founder of Women's Rights Without Frontiers. We'll learn about her transition from powerhouse corporate lawyer to fighting on the front lines for women in China. A fascinating and inspiring journey.
The Catholic Business Hour, Saturday mornings at 11 a.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Matt Swaim here, inviting you to start your day a better way with the Sunrise Morning Show, weekday mornings here on EWTN. It's a fast-paced program where we cover apologetics, scriptures, and the saint of the day, plus news, sports, entertainment, and family life, all from a Catholic perspective. So join us weekday mornings here on EWTN.
The Sunrise Morning Show. Better way to start your day.
I am Father Thomas Loya, and this week on Light of the East on EWTN, the story of Jonah and the Ninevites, like all stories in the Bible, are not just history lessons.
They are our stories today, our lived experience.
This is particularly true today for the Christians of Iraq who are
the Ninevites and Jonahs of our time.
On EWTN, Sundays at 11:30 a.m. Eastern.
Making a difference. EWTN Radio.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question or comment, call 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985 or send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
Do you have a young adult group in your parish that might be struggling a little bit, or maybe you don't have a young adult group in your parish at all? Tune in to Life on the Rock tonight. Father Mark and Doug are going to talk to Michael Phillimore about just that thing, young adult parish groups. That's tonight at 8 Eastern on EWTN television. And this weekend on the world over, Raymond Arroyo talks to Governor Bobby Jindal and Senator Rand Paul, both currently running for the Republican nomination for president, and Alice von Hildebrand, philosopher, theologian, and author of Memoirs of a Happy Failure. Visit EWTN.com for encore times in your area. Colin, I could listen to Dr. Alice von Hildebrand for hours on end.
She is
a smart human being.
She is, and she knows, probably forgotten far more than we've
Well,
ever
and you
learned.
know, her experiential component is just as strong as her intellectual component. Either one would stand alone by themselves, but when you pair the two together, it's just unbelievable.
Well, and the other aspect of that is she's basically the reservoir for the knowledge, wisdom, and history of
Of her late husband,
Dietrich von Hildebrand,
Yeah.
whom Pius XII called a father of the church for the 20th century, or doctor of the church for the 20th century.
Awesome. We'll head back to the phones now. Joseph's in Melbourne, Florida, listening on Divine Mercy Radio. Joseph, what's your question today for Colin Donovan?
Hello?
Joseph, go right ahead.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I was talking to a friend of mine who is a Protestant who told me that the Catholic Church is an extension of Judaism. And if that's the case, when exactly did the Catholic Church started?
Well, you know, in one sense, that's true. If you believe, as I think all Christians would believe, and that is that Judaism was the preparation for the church, and the Jewish people were the ground out of which and into which the Lord of history would become flesh. And so from a certain point of view, properly understood, I guess you could say that. Because if the Messiah had been accepted by Israel, I don't think it's not God's way to overthrow and overturn. He would transform. And as it turned out, that's exactly what he did. So when God established certain things in divine revelation that the Jews must do, the manner of worship, the manner of penitence, the manner of prayer, there were always elements in that which are immutable and eternally valid because they point to Christ and they prepared for Christ, and nothing that God does in preparing for Christ is ever wasted. But it was up to the Christ and the apostles then to say, this is valid, this is legitimate now under the new covenant, and this is not. So all of the cultic regulations are out, but that prayer should have a liturgical character to it because God commanded that of Israel. Israelites didn't make it up. God told them how to structure their worship and how to structure their prayer and all of that. So that has an eternal validity even though it takes specifically Christian forms. For instance, the liturgical life of Israel was based around sacrifice, based around the Psalms, based around the readings of Torah, of the prophets, and the historical books, both done in the synagogue, when the synagogue was established in Babylon during the captivity there, or done in connection with the morning and evening sacrifice in the temple. So it's quite natural that Christianity should, and does, most denominations, not just the Catholic Church, it takes that basic structure. Now I would say this, the Catholic Church took that structure. The Protestant Church took it from us. And that is the structure of the liturgy of the Word in the Mass has been taken from what Judaism did and is used solely within the Protestant churches because they don't have the structure of the sacrifice which Christ himself established at the Last Supper, and that is the blood of the new covenant, to complete the liturgy of the Word as we do in the Mass, where we have the liturgy of the Word and the liturgy of the Eucharist. And you can go on in ways showing how, as the fathers of the church understood and saw, the Old Testament, the New Testament was prefigured in the Old Testament, and the Old Testament was fulfilled in the New, and necessarily fulfilled then in the Catholic Church. Now, when did the Catholic Church begin? I'm going to give an unconventional answer. We asked this question about the unborn child. We asked about the living child. Jack, when did you begin to exist? Was it when you were born? Or was it when you were a unique person? And we would say, well, science, as well as philosophy and theology, says at conception. There you have somebody different from the parents. So when did Christ begin? At the incarnation. But Christ is more than just the Son of God made flesh, born in a moment of time. He's also the head of the mystical body. And if the head was born, the baby was born, unless you believe in partial birth abortion. Then, that's the time to strike. Well, Herod understood that. That's why.
Yes, he did.
That was the time to strike. So the church really began with the incarnation, and this was the division of history between the old and the new. Now, it fully flowered at Pentecost when Christ, having ascended to the Father, he leaves now his incarnate ecclesia, assembly of the redeemed, his incarnate church, with the apostles as the foundation stones, and with believers completing that church. And so we celebrate Pentecost as the birthday of the church. But its conception is the same as the Lord's, the incarnation, because the mystical body is the same Christ as the Christ who was incarnate except that we are now members of that Christ through the church, who was conceived in a way along with. This is why Mary is our mother in every sense of the word. She's the mother of all the redeemed, as Eve is the mother of all the living. And that is so scriptural. I don't understand why Protestants do not jump up and down and shout and accept her with enthusiasm, because these are figures that God himself planted at the beginning of human history in Adam and Eve, and they're fulfilled in Christ and Our Lady. And she is the mother of the redeemed, just as Eve was the mother of all the living. What her name means, as Scripture tells us.
Preach it, Colin Donovan.
There we go. There's when the church was born.
1-800-585-9396. 1-800-585-9396. Toll free anywhere in North America. Next up, I owe an apology to our next caller, and the reason that we could not get Janess on the phone earlier is because Janess is not his name. It's Julius. Julius, thanks for hanging in there with us. You're on with Colin Donovan.
All right, thanks for taking the call.
Sure.
I have a problem explaining the immutability of God as a doctrine or a teaching, looking at the experiences from the Old and the New Testament and the various ways in which God revealed himself. So, how do we explain the unchangeable nature of God or the unchanging nature of God to people?
Sure. I think I'll let Mark Twain explain it. I think he was about 16 and he thought his old man knew absolutely nothing. And then he notes later on, he said, when I got to be 21, I was surprised at how much he had learned in those few years. This is how we are. God has not changed, but he does treat us in our situation. And the situation of the world after the fall and the necessity of preparing through discipline, as St. Paul says, you know, that the law was a tutor, was a disciplinarian. This is necessary, just as a child needs discipline. We don't say, well, you know, eat whatever you want, honey. Just you want junk food, eat whatever you want. No, we use discipline. We prepare, we dispose. And then when the kids grow up, you know, mom and dad weren't as stupid as I thought they were all those years. This is the same thing. So what we perceive as a God who may be strict, demanding, and so on, is a God who's dealing with a bunch of juveniles, the human race. And we're still pretty much a bunch of juveniles.
Yeah,
but
juvenile might be a compliment.
Might be a compliment. We've grown up to accept grace. We've grown up to receive the gospel. We're still obliged to live it, and we don't always do that as well as we were. But we're in a far better situation today because grace gives freedom, the freedom of the sons and daughters of God, the freedom of the children of God. So we're looking at it through the human lens, but really God, it's the Scripture tells us this is what God had to do because we were hard-headed, or our ancestors were hard-headed, undisciplined, unruly, unwilling to accept the truth and adhere to it, you know, and they needed that. And we have an example of that very sort of hermeneutic, if you will, in Matthew 19. We said, you know, the scholars, the theologians of the day went to Jesus. They thought they had him on a trick question about divorce because they were themselves were fighting back and forth of, if a woman's a bad cook, can I have a get? Can I divorce her? No, it has to be for adultery. So they go to him, we're going to force him to choose between our positions. He says, no, Moses allowed that because of the hardness of your heart. And you could say the same thing. God punished strongly because of the hardness of the human heart, and that kind of discipline was all we understood. And it was for the good of the human race, just as the punishment of a child is for the good and the future of that child. That child was the human race. We're a little bit more grown up now. We're still pretty hard-headed. I'm not sure we're mature. Maybe we're teenagers or something like that. But that's the reason. It's from our perspective, and we can't attribute what we needed as some, God, the God of the Old Testament, as the Donatists, I believe it was, believed. The God of the Old Testament, he's gone. Now we have the merciful, loving Jesus. And in fact, a lot of modern people, I think this way too, because it sort of explains how they like to view the world, that they can get away with everything still because the God of the New Testament is all loving. He's not that angry God of the Old Testament. He's all loving. He lets me do whatever I want. Well, maybe that's the mentality of the teenagers, just, proving we're not quite mature yet.
Now we'll head to the birthplace of Mother Angelica, Canton, Ohio. James, listening on Living Bread Radio, AM 1060. James, you're on with Colin Donovan.
James, listening on Living Bread Radio.
James, if you could turn your radio down. There you go. Go ahead, James. What's your question?
My question is, not too long ago, I was listening to something on a show here, and there was a priest, and he was giving, somebody called it, they were talking about confession.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody brought up the question, well, about can non-Catholics, go to confession? And obviously, no, unless it's, near death. But then he said something to the effect that non-Catholics should confess their sins in the tradition of the church that they're, the Protestant church that they're in. Now, since when was the sacrament of confession made only for Catholics? I thought his answer was totally misleading.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he may not have intended the way you took it, although it sounds to me like you didn't take it too far off from what he was saying, certainly. The church does have norms of discipline in this, and that is, if a Protestant freely approaches a Catholic priest in that situation and asks to confess. Now remember, for a Protestant, it's a confession of the whole of life, and somebody on their deathbed might be disposed to do that. The church, I think, would say, according to that particular canon, I believe it's 843, or 843, I think, that they would be entitled to hear it because they've approached, they have a serious reason, the hour of death or near death. He could question them a little bit on their belief. Do they understand what it is that they're asking? Do they understand what it is they have to confess, their obligations with regard to confession? That's often going to be a process. It's not something that can be done instantaneously, but obviously if somebody is dying on the battlefield, Catholic ministers, priests have given absolution to non-Catholics. It's simply because of that circumstance. So that could be done. If ultimately the person doesn't want to confess to the priest, I think if I'm in that situation, I would try to encourage them to, relieve, well, if you don't want to confess, do you wish to unburden your conscience of something to a minister of God? Because it might entice the person to make an act of perfect contrition, which is the only other way to be absolved from mortal sin. This is the great blessing that the Catholic Church is. The Church has that power that Christ gave to the apostles on Easter night to absolve or retain. And that means absolution and retention of sin is not found outside of that sacrament. The Church makes this distinction, and that is a person who does not have access to the sacrament, such as a Catholic. You're in a car accident, you think you're dying, and they're waiting for the ambulance and you might die. Try to make a perfect act of contrition if you have mortal sin, because God sees that, and on the basis of that will justify you. This is the doctrine of the Church. So I would not encourage priests to send people to their other ministers unless that's the only other way to get them to make that, unburden themselves, hopefully that it would be an act of perfect contrition. I think I would want to encourage them to make at least that act of contrition to the priest, even if it were not something that he could give sacramental absolution for.
If you've got a question for Colin, we've still got time for you at 1-800-585-9396. Next up is Max in Wisconsin, listening on FM 88.5. Max, what's your question today for Colin Donovan?
Hello. Hi, Mr. Donovan.
Yes, go ahead.
Just wondering, so I'll ask you a question. Just wondering if I can respond back also when you answer. This is a question with regard to the resurrection. Like sometimes, if you look at the two verses in the Bible, specifically in Mark 16:1, where it says that Mary Magdalene and Mary and Salome and all the ladies had come to anoint to get the spices. They said they bought the spices after the Sabbath, and then you go again. That was the first part. Then the second one is you look at that was Mark 16:1. Then you go to Luke 23:56. Then it said they prepared their spices and they rested on the Sabbath. So we can see the clear thing is that the resurrection cannot happen and it did not happen on a Sunday. That was one thing is we can see definitely that there were two Sabbaths on the same week on that week when Jesus died, because the preparation day was the day was just before the Passover. That was the feast of the unleavened bread. So when we go to see that unleavened bread, it was the feast. That was the preparation. The preparation day was just before the feast. So when Jesus died was the feast of the Passover, and then there was the feast. That was the high Sabbath. That was, if you ask any Jewish person, they'll say that's the high Sabbath, and that was on a Wednesday. The high Sabbath was on a Thursday, and Jesus died on a Wednesday. And if we see 3 days and 3 nights, so it exactly will be Saturday just before just sunset.
Okay.
So that's the 3 days. So if you can answer, and if I can just respond to it, whatever, so that I can know exactly what I'm speaking.
First of all, I'm sure that looks to you like a great insight, but I would rather take the insights of the first century apostles. The church has celebrated Sunday from the very beginning based on historical memory. We can go back and we can make guesses about, was it the year 29, was it the year 30, was it the year 31? Was the Last Supper, I think it's called the Chabura, it's the meal of the disciples of the rabbi, and then everyone dispersed to their own homes to celebrate. We can make all of these kinds of things, but they are all abstract. What is significant is what actually happened, and the early church knew. St. Paul went to the synagogues on the Sabbath. And then on the Lord's Day, he celebrated, which was the first day of the week, he celebrated with the Christians. They had the breaking of the bread. They had the Eucharist. The writers of the first century take that for granted, whether it's Ignatius of Antioch, Polycarp, Justin Martyr, or others. So we can speculate, and this goes on all the time based on whether you think Jesus died in 29 or 30, or a tradition of it being 33, which actually seems very unlikely. And you make all these kinds of guesses of which day of the week the Passover on, which Passover was it? Was it the one of the actual Passover night, or was it the one that rabbis celebrated with their disciples? You can go through all of these hijinks, but the church has a historical memory of the event. So I see no logic of debating in an abstract way when this was. The other thing with the 3 nights, in the Jewish way of counting, that was 3 days. We think of 3 days as 24 times 3. That Friday afternoon to Sunday, that's not 3 days. Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Now, it wasn't 3 nights either, but it was 3 different liturgical days in the Jewish calendar, and that's what's important. So I appreciate the hard work, the hard academic work you put into working that out. But I'm going to take the historical memory of the church that Jesus rose on a Sunday and died on a Friday, and I will use that as my prism to try to explain those things. Not that I or many others have actually successfully explained them. You might go look what Pope Benedict XVI wrote in his 2 volumes on the one particular volume on Holy Week. He looks at some of these questions, and that might be helpful to you.
Is that helpful, Max?
Yeah, that's good, Lavin. But I just wanted one more question to ask is since you pointed out about the 3 days and 3 nights, because Jesus himself had given the proof just to be 3 days, 3 nights in the heart of the earth. And he gave Jonah's example, 3 days. Jonah's example was full 3 days and full 3 nights. Not only that, for the 3 days and 3 nights, Jesus said, are not there 12 hours in a day? So he was exactly saying it is full 3 days and 3 nights. That was the full meaning of the 3 days and 3 nights. Because,
you've judged to determine that in the most literal way possible. I guess you're free to do that.
Next up is Patrick in Michigan, listening on AM 1140. Patrick, you're on with Colin.
Hi, yes. Thanks. And Colin, your answer to the 2 questions ago, the perfect contrition on your deathbed, that was absolutely beautiful. Thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome.
Let me just try to phrase this question. I'm going to take about 10 steps back from some of the questions you've been getting.
Now, we got about a minute and a half left, Patrick, so step quickly.
All right, I will. Basically, I'm a convert. I was a Protestant before, of course. I'm sort of a professional bureaucratic mastermind, and so I've really enjoyed going so deep into the legalism of the Catholic Church, and I see the need for it. However, I really miss, when I was a Protestant, the absolute certain feeling of just because I know I'm a Christian, I'm going to heaven when I die no matter what.
I can
feel
understand
that in the legalism, I've sort of lost that confidence, and it's to the point of, if I was God, I wouldn't want all these crap heads around me. I only want saints in heaven. You know? So how do you guys feel about that? Are you 100% confident that you're going to heaven?
No, I'm not, but not because of God's. I have confidence in his power. It's called the virtue of hope. Hope is confidence in God's power, that if I am to be saved, it will be because of his power, not of anything I can do. I don't have confidence necessarily. That doesn't mean that I can't fail. I can fail God. He can't fail me. So I think the Protestant absolute sense of salvation, although is posited on confidence of God, really suggests that their confidence in themselves and expect a sort of magical adherence to the gospel that will save them, rescue them. I don't think we're infallible or are we impeccable. And I don't think we can have that kind of hope, yes. And on that ground alone, I'm going to be in heaven.
Colin, I missed you.
I'll be back.
Next week.
Next week.
All right. On behalf of our host, Colin Donovan, our producer, Elena Rodriguez, call screener, Matt Kabinski, I'm Jack Williams, thanking you once again for tuning in. Back at it again Monday with scriptural apologist John Martinoni. Until then, God bless.